It's only 5.
All right. Welcome everybody to the parsha class. Parsha Vayechi 5784. And a quick summary of the parsha. Let's start with that. This is the last parsha in Sefer Bereshit. Next week we will be starting Shovavim, starting Shemot, and a whole new Chumash. It's Shovavim Tat this year. That's correct. It's a leap year. Yeah, so extra days to learn about and consider and think about our holiness and our ethical behavior in that area. We might even have a class about it. I'm still debating whether I should do that. Class for men. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see what happens. So this is the end of Bereshit. This is the end of the Jewish people as a family. And the next parsha is going to be the Jewish people as a nation, or already being made into a nation. Right now, it's one giant family. We had all the 70 people mentioned in last week's parsha that came with Yaakov, or were already there. I'm not going to get into who it was. Anyway, 70 Jews, at least. And this week's parsha we have the death of Yaakov. Yaakov is sick, he's old, and he gathers first his son and his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. He blesses them just the same way we bless our sons nowadays to be like Ephraim and Manasseh. He blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. That's what we're like, hanging on to that bracha when we give a bracha like that. And then he gives a bracha to all of his sons. Of course, we've talked about previous years how those brachos don't always seem like brachos. Some of them altogether sound like curses almost. They're not all friendly, but certainly one of the comments I had in the past about this is that knowing your weaknesses, having an idea of what you need to work on, is also a blessing. Like if he mentions, we'll get to it, I'm sure. With we're going to talk about the famous Shimon and Levi bracha today. But even when he's saying something that seems negative, even that's a lesson. So learning of that lesson is also a bracha of sorts. And if he passes away, he had asked Yosef to promise that he would bury him not in Mitzrayim but in Egypt, not in Egypt but in Eretz Yisrael. He's brought to Eretz Yisrael. He's buried there, and so too we believe happened to all of the sons of Yaakov as well. That they were all buried in Eretz Yisrael. Eventually they were brought. Their bodies were brought with the tribes. As they traverse the desert, as we'll begin to see in next week's parsha. They're not in the desert yet; they're still in Mitzrayim. Okay, so without any further ado, there's a lot to talk about, a lot of symbolism, a lot of lessons to be learned from this week's parsha, and I hope we can get to some of that in a timely manner. That's not what I was looking for. Okay, let's try this again. Share. Okay, I'm gonna share this. Okay, here we go. Sharing the screen now. The sound of the beep. Okay. So here we go. So we've got the Safari sheet that I sent out by email earlier. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, the link is in the description of the video. And all right, so the very first pasuk tells us, "Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim." Yaakov lived in Eretz Mitzrayim Sheva Esrei Shana, 17 years. Vayehi Yimei Yaakov Shnei Chayav Sheva Shanim V'Arbaim Me'at Shana. He now lived 147 years. So you do the math, it's pretty easy to figure out. He was 130 when he came to Mitzrayim. He lived in Mitzrayim 17 years. 130 plus 17 is 147. You're welcome. That was your math lesson for the day. Now, what Rashi points out in his very first comment, actually, on this parsha, is that this parsha is a parsha stuma, which means it's a closed-off parsha, which means there's usually a break, there's usually like empty space between one subject and another in the Torah, and certainly between parsha and parsha, there's usually going to be quite a bit of empty space, maybe even almost a whole line. This parsha, from Vayigash, from last week's parsha, until this parsha, Vayechi, there's no break. It's what's called a parsha stuma, and Rashi tells us why is it a parsha stuma. So we're going to translate Rashi the way he's usually translated, and then we're going to see how that doesn't make sense, and then we're going to have to retranslate it based on some of the ideas of Rav Shimon Schwab. Okay. We will have him later. Don't worry. All right, he's not the only Yaki. Okay. All right. So Baruch Hashem. All right. So he says, Lama parsha zu stuma. Rashi says, why is this a closed off parsha? Lefi shekevan sheniftar Yaakov Avinu nistamu einehem ulibam shel Yisrael mitzaram hashiibud. So from the death of Yaakov, stuma, by the way, means mute. Means closed off, right? It's a closed parsha. So the death of Yaakov closed off the eyes and hearts of Israel because of mitzarat hashibud, because of the difficulty of the enslavement, that they were enslaved. And they were and so to symbolize how closed their eyes and hearts were, how pained they were, the parsha that deals with Yaakov's death is also closed off, just like the hearts and minds of the hearts and eyes, literally, of the Jewish people were closed off. So too, we're closed off. At least the parsha is closed off for that reason, and that's what Rashi says, and his source here is Breshit Rabbah. Off the top of your heads, can anybody notice any problems with that? Like actually a huge problem with that. So what are we saying? The eyes and hearts were closed off because of the death of Yaakov. Because what happened when Yaakov died? Seems like Rashi's saying they became enslaved. What's the problem with that? They weren't enslaved. The slavery didn't start until, we're going to find out in next week's parsha, until the death of the last of the Shvatim, Levi, by the way, right? So, which is, a good, 50, 60 years later. So why is this parsha closed off? Because Yaakov's death caused the suffering? No, it didn't cause any suffering. Nobody was suffering yet. There's no shibud. There's no slavery. There's no enslavement. What's the problem? So obviously, either Rashi's got his wires crossed, or, since that's almost impossible because Rashi is just too much, and he knows too much, he doesn't make mistakes. Obviously, we're not understanding him right. So that's we're going to look at the Mayan Beit HaShoeva. That's the Sefer of Rav Shimon Schwab, and he quotes this Rashi, and he quotes it in its entirety, etc. And then he says, "Im kein tzarich biur inyan hashibu b'shatchila mitat Yaakov." We have to understand what it means that the shibud started, that the slavery started at the death of Yaakov, because it didn't. Kishin nitbonen b'han hagat Yosef acha ptirat aviv. So Yosef was still in charge after his father died for quite a while. Right, Yidgal lefana of davar tema shebetum is mi yemei hachanotim v'lamin yemei ha'evel. So there's I'm sorry, not me. There were 40 days of whatever they were doing to Yaakov's body. I'm not going to get into that. We talked about that in previous years. They didn't mummify it, by the way, but they somehow using natural means, they tried to preserve the body, right, in some way. And so there was that, and then there was 30 days of mourning, and so let's get to Louis Amar. No, that's not it. Hold on. Right. Anyway, the point is, Amnam Kasha Hare Yosef Hu Hashalit al Haaretz. The question: Yosef was still in charge of the land. There's no shibud. The Jews are not enslaved. The Jews aren't suffering. Yosef is still in control. And this is very clear in the psukim, without having to go into midrashim and everything else. The history books, the Torah makes it very clear that Yosef is still in charge, and so there is no reason to think that there's a shibud of any kind. Matzinu Mishnah Lamelech Yitztarich Yistadel Al Yidei Kama Matzilim V'Gam Levakish V'Kapa Rofa V'Lashon Tachanunim Kizeh. So he's second in command. He's the viceroy. There's no reason to think that there's any problem at all. So Im Kain Lama Hametin. We're going to skip a little bit here. Lokvar Yaakov Tikaf Umiyad Achar Ptirato. So just find a good place to restart to get to the answer his question. So anyway, so he says, and he mentions the thing that the slavery didn't start until the death of the last of the Shvatim, and that's not in the Torah specifically. That's in Chazal. Anyway, hu hadavar asher dibur Chazal shekishemet Yaakov Avinu hatchila ba'avur hayinu nevad mi Yosef koach hamamshala. So what happened was, even though Yosef is still in charge, something happened when Yaakov died that sort of caused Yosef to lose some esteem amongst the Egyptians. Ba'ota sha'a yared dargato liyod rak ish mekuba v'chacham v'yashir gadol v'doma lemelech. So what they thought of him as, yeah, okay, he's kubad, he's respected. Yeah, sure, he's a chacham, he's wise. Sure, he's ashir, he's rich, and doma lemelech, and he has a lot of power. He's like a king. Aval lo haya od hashalit al haaretz. But in a sense, somehow he lost some esteem amongst the people. He didn't really have control of the land like he used to. Mitam zeh lo nichnas Yosef tikav al paro in v'achar hashivim yom lo haya min hakavod lichnas befleitin hamelech kashehu aval v'shalach bekashto al yedei shlichim kedvarav rakim dugmat hanhagat hishtadol lefnei haparetz. So he became important. Yes, he was obviously respected, but not as much as he used to be. And then that is going to affect the Jewish people, as we'll see. Parsha stuma ein hatchilat parsha hadasha nitgareshet kamo kain chala hagalut b'li hargasha. So what he's saying is, what happened? And by the way, it's important to also remember the Rav Schwab experienced Nazi Germany, right? So he's bringing a little bit of that experience with him, and he's telling us a very important thing. The slavery in Egypt didn't happen with a snap. It didn't happen overnight. It happened with little things first. The Egyptians started disrespecting Yosef a little bit. Didn't really trust his family so much, didn't like them, and then eventually, treated them as less than, etc. These things sort of snowballed. And what this parsha is saying, what Rashi is saying here, by saying that it's a parsha stuma, is not that the eyes of the Jewish people were dimmed or closed off because Yaakov died. The eyes of the Jewish people were blind, were closed. They didn't see what was happening. Yaakov died, and things were, and their esteem in the country got lower, and they didn't notice it. It went right over their heads. It was time for them to already notice things, and they didn't. Just like you could say, just like the Jews in Nazi Germany, who some of them didn't get it. They didn't know what was happening. They were like, this is going to pass. Oh, it's okay that our neighbors hate us. Oh, it's okay that the president of the country is talking about killing us all. It'll pass. These things, Okay, you can. I don't mind you applying it to nowadays. They're definite. In definitely some places there are certain signs for sure that. Maybe. Right? Maybe it starts in TikTok. Maybe colleges. Yeah, for sure. And definitely social media is like that nowadays. But for sure, we can't be blind to it. We need to we need to know what's going on, when it's going on, and that's what makes it a parsha stuma. Not that the Jewish people started suffering, but the steps that led to their suffering had started already, and they didn't know it. Right? Their hearts and their eyes, and he notices. By the way, he points out also that eyes and hearts mean something, right? Eyes is what you see. In other words, it's the physical stuff, right? Your eyes are closed. That means you don't see what's there, what's physical. You can have your eyes closed and hear music. You can have your eyes closed and smell smells, right? When your eyes are closed, what it means is you don't see something physically in front of you. As opposed to hearts being closed. When a heart is closed, what that means is you're not feeling something, right? You're numb to what's going on. So that's one way to start the parsha anyway. And that's and by the way, this what if we want, we can look at the Rashi again, or you can look at it on your own. You'll notice that it fits into the words of the Rashi perfectly. You don't have to say, Rashi just got it wrong, and then Rav Schwab understood it well. No, Rav Schwab is making Rashi make sense. Right? It's not. It just we translated it wrong. So it's. I think it's a beautiful way to start the parsha. Anyway, what's in the next verse? Mem Zayin Chavtet, 47:29. That was, by the way, that was 47:28. Again, I did the math for you. Vikru Yimei Yisrael Lamut, and it became time for Yisrael to die. We've talked about in previous years why it says Yisrael, sometimes why Yaakov. All right, not for now. Vikra Livno Yosef, and he called for his son for Yosef. V'yomer lo, and he said to him, Im namatchatechem be'enecha, if I have found favor in your eyes, simna yarcha tachet yirechi, put your hand under my thigh, ve'asita yimadi chesed, and do a kindness for me, ve'emet, and truth, al nak tikreini be'mitzrayim, don't bury me in Mitzrayim. So we've spoken about this verse in previous years. What we might not have noticed in the past, though, is what he calls his son. V'ikra livno liYosef, and he called for his son, for Yosef. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but the Or Chaim points out that maybe it is. He starts off by saying, Tam shelo kara lo Yosef. First of all, it's interesting that he's not called Yosef. Yesh tam pasha b'davar lefi sheyesh biyado. He's the father. He can call him whatever he wants. He doesn't have to, doesn't have to call him the king or whatever, the viceroy. Tam omlivno. Well, we should figure out why he calls him livno liYosef. Because remember, there's no extra words in the Torah. And it's interesting, by the way, I as I was reviewing for the class, I noticed that the lesson we're going to learn in this from the Or Chaim here is something we're going to see in a different way later on in the parsha. But we'll see when we get there. V'lo hifsig lomar liYosef ve'ein lo Yosef achar l'taot. So why does he call him Yosef? Why does he call him Livno? To my son, to Yosef, seems a little extra. Gam hosif tevat lamad liYosef. Also liYosef, Livno Yosef. It could have also made sense So he says, Nira kivaha katuv l'tei tam l'kriya ech yikra hedyot l'melech. You have to remember, this Yaakov is not even a citizen. He's a visitor to the country. And he's calling Yosef to come visit him. Yosef is not just Yosef. Yosef's not a visitor. Yosef is the viceroy. Yosef's way up there. He's like almost a king. You can't just say, "Hey, king, come over here." So he has to show him some respect. He is the king. On the other hand, Livno Yosef. The Or HaChaim points out to emphasize that that he is still his bno, he's still his ben, he's still his son, no matter what high position he is, no matter he's the second in command of the giant empire of Egypt, doesn't matter. What's important is for Yosef anyway. What's important is that he's still his son. He's a very dutiful son. He listens to his father. He respects his father. And by the way, he's got a lot of reasons to respect his father. I just want to point out, it's Yaakov we're talking about, not just somebody, right? Yaakov is one of the avot. He's the holy, this holy man. In Kabbalah, he's considered like the perfect man in some ways, and he's been his teacher, his father. He's a leader. He's a lot of things, right? And so all of those things put together gives reason for Yosef to respect him. However, because of his current position, he also has to be treated as Yosef, as as this position almost of this second in command. So when he calls him respectfully, but at the same time, knowing that Yosef is going to treat him with the respect that a father deserves. So he has both of those roles that he has to play. It's not always an easy thing to do. The Gemara, the Or HaChaim points out, the Gemara talks about what to do if your son is your Rebbe. Right? There's a Gemara like this. It gets complicated. Let's say your son becomes the Rav of your community, right? I'm sure it does, or you're in your son's shul. How are you supposed to act? When who gets the primary respect and stuff like that. There's Gemaras about these things, and so this is the kind of balance. This is the kind of thing that Yosef and Yaakov had to deal with. All right, let's go on to the next chapter. In the next chapter, this is the bracha that Yaakov gives to Yosef. He says, chapter 48, verse 7. V'ani b'voi b'padan meita alai racha. When I was going through Padan, when I was going basically Padan Aram, when I was going into right, when I was traveling with the family back to Eretz Yisrael from Lavan, right? Meita alai Rachel died on me. Be'eretz Canaan, back in Eretz Canaan. B'derech ba'od kivat Eretz. While we were still like crossing into the land, Lavo Ephrata, right by the land of Ephrat. Ekbaraha Sham, I buried her there. B'derech Ephrat. We know where she's buried. He Beit Lechem. It's a place called Beit Lechem, Beit Lechem, Bethlehem, and so he goes into all this detail about how Yosef's mother died on the road. He had to bury her, and the question that a lot of commentaries ask, I think we've asked this in previous years as well. Although right now I'm not sure. Now that I think about it, but the question is, why is he going into so much detail? Yeah. Your mother died. Why do you have to go into details? Oh, I didn't take her into Mar HaMachpelah. I didn't, didn't make a whole big deal out of her death. Oh, he buried her on the road. It doesn't seem.
He's trying to justify it.
It sounds like it, right? And I don't know how much is this supposed to work. Why all this detail? So Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, the Bishkiach Mir, So he has a collection of his thoughts, are published in a work called Sichot Musar. So in Sichot Musar, there's an essay. And by the way, he's often, I don't know, this doesn't seem like people really appreciate what a brilliant mind he was. He was such a philosopher. He could have been, I mean, God forbid he wouldn't have been the Mishkiach Amir. He would have had a great career as a philosopher. He's a brilliant mind. Anyway, so he brings other examples, including the he's not really talking about the parsha in and of itself. He quotes it and he brings it up, and he quotes Rashi, which we should have quoted also, but basically that like Benji said, that all of this detail is meant to somehow justify the reason why Rachel was buried where she was and when she was. But he says more than that. When somebody hears a command of Hashem, when somebody hears Hashem's voice, Rak b'shah she'na'arim et kol ha'afar hadvuk misaviv. This is beautiful, like very poetic language. He's basically saying the earth stands still. Everything stops. And like everything becomes this like you become hypersensitive to everything around you. So Rak az mitgale devar Hashem epi shehu kol zman shematzui pirud. I can't read this word. It's underlined in a weird way. Shehu me'avak hatevim b'makom. If you're distracted by the things of this world, you won't hear Hashem's voice. So when you hear Hashem's voice, it's the opposite. The things of this world, like, they don't disappear, but they don't matter. Everything stands still. Everything stops. Right? He says, by the way, the same thing he gives, like I said, another example. When the Torah was given, it talks about how people heard or saw noises. Right, and everything, just like the whole world was stopped. It was on pause. So the reason why this justifies his burying Rachel when he did, why all these details matter, is because these details show that the world stopped because he was hearing the Devar Hashem. And when you hear the Devar Hashem, everything stops. And if you're hearing Devar Hashem and the word of Hashem tells you, bury this woman here, that's the only justification you need. Nothing else matters. Oh yeah, I loved her very much. Doesn't matter. I was running late to get to Eretz Yisrael. Doesn't matter. It was almost Shabbos. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Devar Hashem. Hashem commanded you to do something. That's all that matters. And that's why he gives all these details about her death, because that's when he heard the Devar Hashem. The Devar Hashem is what told him to bury her there, and that's the only justification he needs. And by the way, not that it matters too much for our purposes, but it worked. In other words, Yosef isn't angry at him. Yosef still fulfills his part of the bargain of burying his father where his father asked them to, etc. But that's the idea. The essay, it's in the source sheet, and it's quite long, but I summarized a lot and skipped a lot. So if you have a chance to look through it, it's a very worthwhile piece. Anyway, let's skip to 48:14. I'm going to skip 7 verses. And this is the blessing of Menashe and Ephraim, famous ideas, and we've you must have you might have seen there's a lot of art pieces where you have Yaakov on his deathbed, crisscrossing his arms to give his blessings to Ephraim and Menashe. So what happened was Ephraim is Menashe is the firstborn, and Ephraim is the secondborn. And so Yaakov places his sons in a way that that Yosef places his sons in a way that Yaakov's right hand would be over the firstborn, and his left hand would be over the secondborn. And what does Yaakov do? He crosses his arms. Okay, and I mean, there's reasons. Rashi tells us that even though Menashe is the firstborn, a great leader is going to come from Ephraim, who is, by the way, Yehoshua, right? The leader after Moshe comes from Ephraim, and that's what Rashi says that he moved his hands with seichel. So let's look at the verse itself. Vishlach Yisrael et yimino v'yashad al rosh Ephraim, and Yisrael reached over and put his right hand on Ephraim's head. It should have been the left, but put his right. Even though Ephraim is the secondborn, he's the younger one. That's smolo al rosh Menashe, and he put his left hand on top of Menashe. Shikel et yadav, sikel from the word seichel, like he moved his hands wisely. Ki Menashe habechor, because Menashe really is the bechor, and still he put his hands the way he did, like that. And like I said, we've spoken about this in previous years in all kinds of different ways. But what I wanted to point out, and like I said, this has something to do with something we learned earlier today. The Amek Davar, which is written by the Netziv, the famous Rosh Yeshiva from Volozhin. So the Netziv writes that he asks a question that you might not have considered. If you got two guys in front of you, and you want to put your right hand on one of them and your left hand on the other, what's the easiest way to do that? Or relocate them. Relocate them. I want to put my right hand on him, left hand on him, switch them around. Menashe, you stand over here. Ephraim, you stand over here. It could have been much easier. You have to crisscross it. What's going on? Why is he crossing his arms like that? It must have been really awkward, by the way. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried this before, but you're like on people's heads, and like you're in bed. I don't even understand the angle that he must have really long arms. Either way, it must have been really difficult. So Biur Chazal Midrash Rabbah Shagia lo zeh b'shvil shaya hatzayer at isko didine I remember b'sechta Tamid sheshal Alexander. No, so this is something else. Okay, yeah, here we go. Seichel al yadav ki Menashe bechor. So Menashe was the firstborn. So Yaakov he didn't really have to switch his arms. Lahafoch et mamad habanim. He could have just had the banim, the sons, stand in the right places for himself. Aval b'asher Menashe habechor ma shehachi Mikevan she'amud Menashe l'ragel b'yamino mimini shel Yaakov Ephraim l'regel hasmol rak et yadav seichel sheyeh lehefech. They're already standing there. If you make them move, Menashe will feel or not feel, Menashe will somehow lose some of the respect that he deserves as the Bechor. He's standing at Yaakov's right, which is where he's supposed to stand. That's the respectful place for him to stand. For him to now be moved to the left would be disrespectful to him. And even though, yes, it's true, for whatever spiritual reasons, the descendant of Ephraim is going to have some sort of spiritual superiority to Menashe, nevertheless, Menashe has right now physical superiority to his brother. He is the Bechor. And yes, there's throughout the Torah. Rav Hirsch points this out also. Throughout the Torah, there's the firstborn never wins out, especially in Bereshit. You got the Cain and Hevel. You've got Yishmael and Yitzchak, and then you have Yaakov and Esau. Like even Reuven is supposed to be the firstborn, and he loses out. The firstborns never win out in this book. Hmm? Who? Yeah. Miriam is older. Later on, we'll have Aaron is older than Moshe, and he doesn't become the leader, even though Moshe pushes for it. He tries to sell it. It didn't work out. But he says more. I don't really want to get into it now, but it's important to remember that there's different things in different characteristics in each tribe. Is a different strength, and so it's important to have spiritual strengths. It's important to have physical strengths. There's everybody, as we're going to see from the brachot of the Shvatim, there's definitely a reason for the different positions that they're in. What I find is interesting is this is what I was saying before regarding Yosef and Yaakov treated each other. That there's this balance. So here too, there's this balance of how to treat a Bechor like Menashe, who you know that you're his spiritual superior, I guess. Ephraim is like somehow superior to Menashe in some ways, but he's still your firstborn brother. He's still your older brother, and so you have to give him the right respect in that sense. There's more on that in the source sheet, but I did want to go a little bit further, get to this beautiful comment from Rav Hirsch. You're welcome, Benji. I know you were looking forward to that. All right, Shimon and Levi. So let's get to the brachas themselves. So chapter 49, verses 5 through 7, tell us the bracha of Shimon and Levi. Now, keep in mind, Shimon and Levi in a previous parsha, all the way back in Vayeshev, no, before Vayeshev, in Vayishlach, thank you, in Vayishlach, when Dinah was taken by Shechem, so Shimon and Levi were the brothers who went and massacred the town and avenged their sister. We're about to see. Because the bracha they get is definitely seems to be tied in with that, and yet it does seem a little bit like a not bracha, as we're about to see. All right, so it says Shimon v'Levi achim klei chamas mecherotehem. So it says Shimon and Levi, they are, there's different ways to translate it, but they're brothers, and they have, and they're somehow equal, right? Klei Hamas, their weapons are Hamas, are violence. They work with violence. Good. Bishdom al tavo nafshi b'kelatam al techad kavodi, and it says I don't want to be involved in their I don't want my honor to be involved in their decisions. Ki ba'apam hargu ish, because when they're angry, they kill the man. Virtzonam ikru shor, and with their ratzon of the desire, they killed an ox. And then he says, interesting words for bracha. They say arur apam, their anger should be cursed. Ki az vevratam ki kashta achalkem b'Yaakov v'afitzem b'Yisrael. So they have their anger should be cursed, and they're going to be divided and scattered amongst the Jewish people. So Rav Hirsch says, Arur apam, let there be no blessing in apam of ratam. A curse upon their anger, and he translates the next word as impetuosity. Impetuousness is or impetuosity. I'm not sure which one is the correct word. Not going to get into it now. I'll ask Feldheim later. But meanwhile, being impetuous means making decisions without thinking about it. Okay? And he goes into, as he usually does, what the word af really means, where it comes from. But what he says is, I'll skip to this part. Accordingly, our verse means when they are filled with anger, it is az and cannot be assuaged, can't be calmed down, and their evra is kasha, stubborn, and cannot be tempered by rebuke or by any consideration. Therefore, both must be subjected to the curse of arur, must be rendered aririm, barren, without power of action. His bracha or curse or whatever to Shimon and Levi is that their anger shouldn't have any power. It should become barren, it should become weak. They shouldn't be able to use their anger. And he continues, whereas Reuben was not sufficiently independent and lacked inner stability, Shimon and Levi were too fiercely aware of their own strength. And when the welfare of the community was at stake, they acted ruthlessly. Right? They know what their power is, and they used it for something that ended up being, although maybe justifiable in some sense, like they were defending the honor of their sister, etc. But as we'll see, that's not the way to do it. He goes on. It is most significant that here, at the laying of the cornerstone of the Jewish people, a curse is imposed upon any violent outburst that runs counter to justice and morality, even if it is intended for the common good, even if you have the right intentions. But if your way of doing it is violent, then that's not the Jewish way to do things. And then he compares that to other countries. It's beautiful. It's political science 101 right here. All right. All other states and nations have adopted the principle that any action is legitimate as long as it serves the interest of the state. Right? The ends justify the means. Right? Acts of cunning and violence that would be punished by ostracism or execution if practiced by an individual for selfish gain are rewarded with laurels and civic honors if they're committed for what is alleged to be the welfare of the state. The laws of morality apply only in the private life. Oh, when you're private, you're supposed to be moral. Whereas in politics and diplomacy, the only recognized law is that of national self-interest. As long as it's good for the country, we can do anything we want. No. Here, by contrast, the last will and testament on which the Jewish people was founded pronounces a curse on cunning and violence, even if they are used for the nation's most legitimate interest, and it sets down for all time the doctrine that even in public life and in the promotion of the common good, not only must the ends be pure, but so must be the means. But what you do and how you do it are equally important. Doesn't what you're trying to accomplish? Okay, it's important, but there has to be a kosher way to do it. You can't, you can't. Let's use it as an example, maybe an uncomfortable example, but still an example. Negotiations for the hostages that Hamas has, right? So, if Israel was run by a religious government, following this idea from Rav Hirsch, for instance, one thing that the government would not ever do is lie to Hamas. You can't lie. We want the hostages back. We're going to deal with, we're going to 100%. There's not going to be any propaganda, not any false propaganda for sure. There's not going to be any false stories. Everything's going to be 100% legit. I'm not saying it's not, by the way. I'm just saying that if for sure there wouldn't be, it would be beyond reproach. Nobody would be able to say, oh, they're doing it wrong. They're lying. They implanted explosive devices in the prisoners they released. They can't. A Jewish government can't do that kind of thing, according to Rav Hirsch. It's interesting, though, he concludes the last two lines here are, however, only Apam Araftam are cursed. The curse is directed neither against Shimon and Levi personally, not against their aims as such, nor against their aims as such. In other words, they're not cursed, not Shimon and Levi are cursed, their anger is cursed, their behavior. All right, let's we've got a lot more I wanted to say about the different brachos and stuff. See how much time we have. Let's maybe just summarize this next piece of the Orach Chaim, even though it's deep and Kabbalistic, but it's worth talking about. Let's Mem Tet, Pasuk Tet. So 49, verse 9, the bracha of Yehuda. Gur Aryeh Yehuda. Yehuda is a gur and an aryeh. Now, it happens to be both of these words mean lion. One means old lion and one means young lion. So it's really weird what he's saying. Yehuda is an old and young lion, is basically what it's saying. And it's B'ter of B'nei Alita. He's raised on prey, on teref. Kara Rava, it's Ka'aryeh, Kalavi, Mi Kumeno. He crouches down like a lion, and like a lion, he gets up. A lot of lions. There's like 3 different words for lion being used in this pasuk, and somehow Yehuda's all of them, and that's what bothers a lot of the commentaries in Chaim. But the Orach Chaim is going to give sort of semi-kabbalistic idea here. And it's worth pointing out that we mentioned this Orach Chaim a few weeks ago in the parsha of Vayechi, when we talked about the incident of Yehuda and Tamar. We quoted the call of the Torah by Rav Eli Munk, another Yeke, and he quoted, or he referenced at the very end. He said, "Look at this Orach Chaim." And so I said then in the class that we would be referencing, we'd look at this Orach Chaim when we get to it. So here we are, we got to it. Let's at least look at it. His question is, why are all these comparisons to lions? Why different lions, different stages of their growth, old, young, whatever? What's going on? And what he says is, Yehuda is not the natural leader. Yehuda is not a born leader, maybe. Yehuda wasn't a leader all the way up to this point, besides his the little incident in last week's parsha when he stood up to Yosef, right? Vayigash Yehuda. Aside from that, there's no real leadership that he's ever done. Yeah, he was a father. Yeah, he had business. Okay, but you don't actually see him being he's the ancestor of David HaMelech. He's the ancestor of Mashiach. Where do you see Yehuda being that kind of person? A David HaMelech, a Mashiach. You don't. So that's what the Orach Chaim says. All these references to different kinds of stages of lion is references to him and how he is not yet matured yet. He will be. After this bracha is what activates his power to make these to make these kinds of decisions. This bracha has the power to turn him into from a young lion into an old lion. Let's call it, right. He transforms here into the leader that he's going to be, and the Orach Chaim concludes his comment that this is what the Melucha is. This is the kingship, the Ad Ki Yavo Shilo Sha'alav Anu Mekuyim Yom Yom Tzefinu LiYoshua. That we every day we hope for Mashiach to come. That's going to come from this bracha. So that's the Orach Chaim here. Yeah. Let's I think the last. Okay, last idea for today. I think we've got some very important, very deep ideas already, and I think let's just get to this last piece. Very sad line here. V'chal Yaakov l'tzavot et banav. When Yaakov is done commanding his sons, he is so fraglav. He stretched out his legs, el amita, to his bed, v'igvav Yosef el amav, and he went. He breathed his last breath, and he joined his family, joined his nation. In other words, he died. Problem is, exactly, that's the problem. Not Rashi, not just Rashi. The Gemara in Tanit says, Yaakov Avinu lo mate. Right? Yaakov Avinu lo mate. That's a Gemara.
I have a couple weeks ago we learned this next to Leah, and I'm like, he did not die. I'm like, that's where we're leaving off? Really, Rashi?
Right.
Really?
Exactly. So it's a very strange idea, and so there are a lot of commentaries of, and we've actually brought this up in previous years, different comments about what it means that he didn't die. We said that maybe it means maybe he as long as he's quoted, he's still alive somehow. Okay, but the Gur Aryeh, interesting name, right? The Gur Aryeh, which you just talked about that pasuk, right? The Gur Aryeh, which is the commentary of the Maharal on Rashi, right? So it's a running commentary throughout the entire Chumash. So he quotes it's a long piece, but you can see it in the source sheet if you get a chance. Just to summarize, basically, he means that that when the rabbis say Yaakov didn't die, it means it's talking about his spiritual life. Right? Yaakov is still alive. Yaakov is us. Yaakov is the Jewish people. Yaakov is Yisrael. We are Yisrael. We are Yaakov. And as long as we're around, as long as we're doing mitzvos, Yaakov is still alive. And he explains, I'm not going to get into it now because, like I said, it's a deeper piece. But he explains why that's not true for other people. Yes, Yaakov is not the only tzaddik. We don't say Avraham lo mate. We don't say Yitzchak lo mate. David HaMelech lo mate. We don't say that, even though in a lot of ways we're connected to them as well. Moshe Rabbeinu lo mate doesn't say that anywhere, right? So that's the Guru. All right, but he talks about why if we're talking about spiritual things, what it means that he didn't die. Now the Pachad Yitzchak, one last comment for today. Rav Yitzchak Hutner wants to give another answer. This is an essay he has on Pesach, and it's very, very, very poetic Hebrew he uses here. I can't even translate some of these lines, but I'll tell you what he says basically. We know, you've probably heard this before, there are 4 levels in understanding the Torah, right? Pshat, Drash, Remez, and Sod. So to translate that simply, Pshat is the simple explanation, and the way that the children learn Chumash, you open it up, the translations, whatever, seems to tell a story, you understand it on the simple level. Drash means ethical teachings. That's usually what we have in our classes here. Rabbi speeches, etc., are usually drash. Remez, there's hints to things. The Gemara says, well, there's an extra vav that hints to this other law, etc., etc. That's remez. Sod is the deepest level. Sod means secret. Right? It's the Kabbalistic stuff. It's you read the Torah, and some people do, and they see magic almost. They see magic on the page. They're able to. People I think I know what you're talking about. Yes, it's right, or see colors. Yeah. I've heard of that. Right, but we're talking about people who look at the Torah's text. They look at the Torah's text, and they're able to determine secret things like how to make golems, or how to levitate. Huh? They are. A golem is true. Maral's golem, but golems are possible. Sefer Yitzir tells you how to do it. But we don't necessarily have the know-how to do that. The point is, the reason why that's true, the reason why the Torah has these different levels, says Rav Yitzchak Hutner, is because life has these different levels. Life has these levels. So yes, on the pshat level, Yaakov died, because it says so in the pshat. On the next level, he didn't die. On the level of life, where it's a little hazier, call it, right? On the level of life where it's not just what you see in front of you, but there's more depth in those deeper recesses of life. Yaakov Avinu is still alive. Now, this is the Pachad Yitzchak now. Right. So in the pshat level, Yaakov died. In the drush level, he lives on. And what that means for us, practically speaking, it means exactly what we've been saying throughout this whole parsha, and that is, we have to keep our eyes open and our hearts open and realize what's going on in the world around us. There's a pshat going on, but at the same time, there's lessons to be learned from the Torah about how to deal with those things, about how to be honest, even in national situations, and obviously everything in between, personal and national, business, everything. All of that is important. That's how we're going to become how we're going to be able to mature as leaders like Yehuda does, and really be makabel, accept these blessings that Yaakov gives to his children and to us as his children's grandchildren forever and ever. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stop the live feed to Facebook. Otherwise, leave comments in the YouTube